from Yale, and it's hermeneutics of culture, science and hermeneutics of culture. I think it's many years since I read it, but it's a great work on the analysis of philosophy of science in terms of how it went historically from Descartes on, and he notes that fact that the disciplines that were formerly seen as united just kind of fell apart into these discrete things that you study, and you get the rise of specialization, especially modern times, more modern. But that's the danger here, is that you're really boxing yourselves in even worse than something like Thomism as a box, because you don't see the interconnectedness and the relationships between various disciplines. You could go all the way through you get be a PhD in any category and have never had a logic class. You don't even know know basic fallacies, and you've got a PhD. It's crazy. I mean, you know everything about mouse reproduction, right? But you don't know what a basic fallacy is.
Which is one of the problems that we're starting to see in kind of more modern scientific theories, that outright contradictions, that subatomic particles can come in and out of existence and stuff like that. And I'd even say the whole Schrodinger's cat conclusion and stuff like that is putting empirical scientism it's giving it a priority over logic, not realizing that they're using logic to do that. So you could actually show there's an inconsistency in there. And well, how does that arise? I'd argue it arises particularly because, again, this division of the disciplines and specialization and the lack of education and seeing how these things are connected and how fundamental logic actually is to both language and science.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also think too that there was perhaps even an aspect to which there was the planned kind of breakdown of the old system with the reductionistic materialism and the naturalism, to then reintroduce under the guise of quantum stuff. I'm not saying everything about quantum theory is necessarily false, but I'm saying that it's interesting because it's a secular reintroduction of metaphysics. They're reintroducing all kinds of weird, crazy, goofy metaphysical ideas under the guise of science. And it's like you just said, like, oh, now I can posit the existence or the possible existence of multiple worlds where, there are flying green unicorns or whatever. There's some universe out there where that probably could exist, right? So we're reintroducing goofy metaphysical stuff, and when we look back to the actually coherent metaphysics of, say, the Middle Ages, Orthodox metaphysics, we're laughing at that and saying how stupid and superstitious it is, while at the same time we're turning around and saying that the quantum foam can we can affect the past from the present through the quantum foam and this kind of nonsense.
What's funny is that again, they're not pulling this stuff out of a vacuum, whether they realize it or not. They're not making up these new and novel ideas. For example, now you have kind of reductive materialists in physics saying, so the big deal obviously is if, and Kant realized this, is if everything is under the domain of mechanics, then everything's causally determined. And his whole idea is, well, if everything's causally determined, there's no oughts or is, right? There's no moral. So every ought or is implies freedom, can. And so, again, naive materialists are going to commit to determinism. But I'd say more sophisticated people within science are trying to, obviously, I don't think most people want to give up their freedom and just say, yeah, I'm automaton and just determined by antecedent causes and events. And so you have this group trying to explain in modern physics now, well, how is it possible that we have human freedom when everything's mechanistically determined by prior antecedent states? And you get the quantum indeterminacy.
But exactly.
This is not a new, they say this as if it's some brilliant new discovery. Epictetus already came up with this when somebody questions his deterministic model and says, what about human freedom? And he says, well, freedom comes from the molecules swerving, the swerve, right? So again,
oh yeah, that's a great point.
It's not even innovative. It's just rehashing some of the same ideas, just like you were saying too. They're critiquing the ancients, saying how stupid and primitive these people are, while at the same time taking their whole metaphysical luggage and incorporating it within to their scientific paradigms.
Yeah, for example, I mean, most of these people would believe that the predominant force within the universe is flux. Everything is in flux. Well, that's an ancient, you know, Heraclitean principle. So not a new idea, but they wouldn't know that. And the irony is that, you know, whether it's atomism from the ancient Greeks or whether it's even the mythology, actually, curiously, you know, the story of the origin of humans in the Greek mythology is that basically the primordial soup at some point got struck by a lightning bolt or something, and you know, one of the titans actually,
Yeah.
and it happened that man is an abortion, man is an accidental product of purely natural forces. So it doesn't really, like, all across the board, you know, even to the point of people like Dawkins saying that, you know, the idea of having panspermia is much more plausible, right? There's alien creators, right, but there's not a creator. I think just shows the absurdity to which, I mean, it echoes what Paul says, right? Paul says that the wisdom of this world is foolishness, and
Yeah.
it's not able to recognize its foolishness, because in order to reason correctly at all, you actually need metanoia, you need repentance, you need to have a God, basically.
Yeah, Saint Isaac the Syrian says that
Yes,
too.
exactly.
That our minds have become diseased and polluted, and that again, and this is something nice to talk about too. That the anthropology of the West fundamentally differs from the East, and so where you have kind of more a dualistic notion of man, in even if that's in a hylomorphic sense with the Latins, in the West, where you have the soul is the life of the physical body, and then the intellectual part of the soul too. That is it for them. In the East, we have more of a tripartite, in which we have the life of the body, the soul, the intellect, the intellectus, and then the nous, which is the eyes of the heart. And that is the highest faculty of man, according to Eastern Orthodoxy. Now, notice in the West, it is the intellect. In fact, they're going to say the Imago Dei, we're made in the image of God insofar as he's intellectual and not personal. Yeah, that we are, the Imago Dei in the East relates to the nous. And the nous, that image of God that's within us, is community, and it's love. That's why the fathers always say we must bring the mind that's diseased down into the heart, right? And through the process of confession and Orthodox asceticism, the nous begins to heal the mind so that the mind can see correctly.
Right.
And so, but in the West, they filter everything through the intellect as if it's the highest faculty. So even giving a transcendental argument, but how do we know, they're continually bringing this down, and they're negating the fundamental starting point that we're made in the image of God first and foremost in the hypostasis, right? That God is a community, and that image is instilled within you, and that therefore that you know, it is love that's the primary faculty of the human being. It's community that we're in, personhood. And the West has a problem with this. They've never been able to articulate a proper philosophy or theology of personhood the way the East, and it's because they're in this dualistic model rather than something closer to a tripartite, and specific with the notion of the nous.
It's also due to the tendency to have definitional and sort of smushed reductionist ideas of what these things mean. So